What are you doing here?
Looking forward to your talk.
Okay, yes, you can, if you stand right behind the computer, the camera will pick you up. Perfect.
All right, let's get started. I'm Yun Zhou. It's my honor to introduce Professor Wang Feng. Professor Wang is Professor of Sociology at the University of California, Irvine, and an invited Professor of Sociology and Demography at Fudan University in Shanghai. He has done extensive research on global social and demographic changes, comparative population and social history, and social inequality, with a focus on China. He is the author of multiple books, and his research articles have been published in venues including Population and Development Review, Demography, the Journal of the Economic of Aging, International Migration Review, and Science. He has served on expert panels for the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and the director of the Brookings Tsinghua Center for Public Policy. His work and views have also appeared often in major media outlets. And Professor Wang Feng has received his PhD from the University of Michigan. And we cannot resist sharing this story. So in 1984, Professor Wang was a recently arrived graduate student at the time, and he was sent to Detroit to do pretest for the 1984 Detroit area study. And in one of the homes, the husband greeted Professor Wang Feng and asked where he was from. Upon hearing China, the husband blurted out and said, "Oh yes, I have interacted with Chinese before in the Korean War." We are so glad to have you home.
Thank you. Thank you, Yun, for this generous introduction. I'm so honored to be back here. This is really a very sentimental homecoming. It's more than anything else because when I came to next year will be 40th year. Knowing nothing about anything, I sat in the brown bags and went through many of the much of my education. So to come back here is really to be able to share the work as a presenter from Brownback, not some fancy lecture. Actually, I got a lot of opportunities for those, but this is more special. So I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Sarah, and for Yun for arranging the visit. Okay, now I learned I only have about 35 minutes, so I'm going to skip some of the background stuff and hopefully to can have time to get to the core, the methodology, the results, and have a little time for discussion. Okay, now this is one slide I would not want to miss, and that's about what 40 years it means. So here, when I came to the University of Michigan 40 years ago, the world population was less than 5 billion, and China accounted for about 22%, not quite a quarter of the population. And this is today in 2022, the world is reaching 8 billion this year, another 3 billion in 40 years. And the share of China's population has dropped to less than 18%. And the latest population projection from the UN says that by the end of the century, China would only have about 7% of the world population. I think that's actually a little problematic because they overprojected Africa. Okay, but in any case, James Lee and I wrote a book 20 some years ago called 1/4 of Humanity. So we're looking from 1/4 to 1/10 of humanity. And also I tell my other friends and students that demography is really a funny field. What you began your career to study, which was fertility decline, how to control population. It's the opposite at the end of your 40-year career is how to raise fertility, right? And then you can't just to switch your recipes for controlling fertility to raise fertility and study aging. So that's where we are on aging. Okay, 40 years, you know, how the field, think of another field. You would have to do this. I skip this, I skip this, I skip this, I skip this, I skip. Yeah, okay. I'm going to skip much of the background, which is China is undergoing rapid accelerating population aging. And China has also had a spectacular 40 years of economic growth, increase in standard of living, and which also includes in this process, the rapidly increased public spending on social welfare, including pension and healthcare, and with a new what called a post-socialist welfare system. And there's still a lot of inequality in the public transfers. So these are the kind of backgrounds I want to just refresh our memory. I'm not going to go into them given time constraint. Now I want to get into the methodology. Okay, so let me just get back also. So I'll go on into the methodologies and with some findings and have time for discussions. So the methodology is based on this. I think it's, you know, the most fundamental curve in understanding human societies and understanding our lives. That is, we all live through our lives as dependents, where we consume more than what we could generate. And then for individual life course, in the middle of one's life course, you generate more, and then to exceeding your labor income, and then become dependent again at a later age of the life course. And now this is from Ron Lee and at Berkeley and Andy Mason. They plotted 3 sets of, this is labor income, and this is the consumption. Okay, 3 different sorts of societies. And we'll see this is, this red line is what's called the high income societies, where this increase in consumption is mostly healthcare. Okay, so the trick is as individual, we cannot transfer what we produce as surplus to our dependent years. Now, I think in many societies, we can actually transfer from the surplus here to the deficit here, either by ourselves as individuals or families, or increasingly by the state. Right? And but here, there's no way. We have to rely on others to transfer, families, governments, communities, other organizations. So this is a fundamental picture to understand how individual lives through their lives and how why societies and states are needed. So this is the conceptual framework for what we do for the rest of 20 minutes or so. This methodology is called the national transfer accounts. So basically is to calculate what is happening in any country at national level and how transfers take place. Now, let me go through very quickly with the formula. So the formula is pretty simple, is the consumption subtracted from consumption labor income. Okay, we all consume, and that has to come up with what's called the transfer, the transfer in, transfer out, that's the net transfer, plus asset income and subtract savings. You leave savings for later on. So any gap between or surplus between income and consumption either is put into savings or has to be made up by transfers. Okay, so this is the fundamental formula for calculating the transfers. However, and this is one example for China, I think it's 2009, we did a calculation. And so this is plotted upside down. So this is actually this is the deficit. So you see this deficit at young ages, and this is surplus, is negative deficit in prime ages, and also life cycle deficit in the later years. And I just want to point out you have different colors here. For instance, this is public transfer, like education, healthcare, it's government spending. So the consumption here, the transfer that goes into the dependent age is not just from the family, not just from the private. Okay. So this is why such kind of calculation is useful. Now, when we look at population aging, obviously we're going to think about, okay, how are we going to be able to transfer the surplus, this is negative deficit, into this area. Yeah. So the NTA, it's organized mostly by Ron Lee at Berkeley and Andy Mason at University of Hawaii and East West Center. And that's their website. So this has been going on for more than a decade. And now close to 100 countries are included in this as a systematic comparative research. And for China, we began this for 2002, and we are now, I just actually got some note this morning about the results for 2018, which is, we need to check, but it's pretty shocking. And I want to go back to here. The issue is, how do we do this calculation of life cycle deficit? If you go to ask people in surveys, there are a lot of spending, consumption. We don't know, we have no idea, like at who's paying for this, where the money comes from, right? So we know we paid tuition and or you paid your expenses, but in terms of other consumption, this is a public university, right? We do not know. In the survey we can't give a number. And so, but every country within the United Nations, they have something called a national, called system of national account. So they report aggregate income and aggregate consumption, public consumption in different areas. But that's just a number. It's not by age. So the idea to put it into the simplest terms is you use micro level survey data to construct consumption income profiles for individuals. And then you use what's called a macro control to bring in the public consumption to match with what's reported for each country, what's being spent, public versus private. And so that is basically the methodology here. But to do this, it's actually extremely tedious. Let me just give you one example. You have the expenditure on education, public expenditure on education total. But you do not know how that is done by age. And when you can ask for in household surveys whether you have children of different school age, but you do not know what is the per capita spending for students at different age. So for China, for instance, we have to look at not only the total spending for education, public spending, but also to go into statistic data to look at per student spending for different school level. And then you try to say, okay, now at this age, this is probably the public spending for each student. And then families also report what they spend on their children's education. So to construct all the stuff takes a lot of time. I gave credit to my colleagues, Shen Ke at Fudan University, who's actually the leading person on the project, and Cai Yong at UNC. So we've been working, and we have other collaborators and to work on this. And so with that, we can construct age-specific profiles for consumption of different type, and also for income and transfers. And then there's another step, that is what is the total amount of transfer, because when we look at population aging, we're looking at the age structure change. So it's not just the per capita level, but also when you have the same level, when you have more elderly, that itself is going to drive up the need for public transfer. So we're doing this for national level at the aggregate level, but it began with working on individual micro level data. Oh, again, it's brown back, so people can interrupt me, okay? And raise this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is going to use the NTA methodology and then results to show a few highlights of the results we have and to inform possibly the effect of both economic growth change and population aging on transfers. The first is to look at income. Okay. Now, this is actually quite interesting because this is different from the income profiles we get from a survey. So this is actually from the survey of the income, and we look at the national total labor income, and then to come back to a adjusted per capita income. And so this shows this is a fixed price for, I think, 2009, I believe. So you can see how over the 12 years, income level just picked up per capita, right? And it was accelerating. This is 2007, 2004, and then 2009 and 2014. But what's also abnormal is how the peak earning age shifted downwards. Why is that the case? So normally the peak earning age is around here. China in 2002 was more kind of normal like this. I think in this country is in the 50s, right? But it's moving to really early to 30. Yes.
Vintage.
What's that?
I think it's a vintage effect that the younger cohorts are more educated than the earlier cohorts.
Right. So absolutely right. I mean, China has undergone rapid improvement in expansion higher education. I mean the education and also migration. When you're looking at a industrialization, urbanization process, young farmers leaving the countryside, going to the cities, and they are the ones who are making a lot higher income. So it's the two effects. What's interesting though is when you want to look at per capita level, look at what's called the life cycle deficit or surplus. So you need to have consumption and income is subtract income from consumption. So this is what's happening in consumption. So between 2004, 2009, in this first, let me see, 2007, the first 5 years, you saw income already was going up quite rapidly from the previous graph, but consumption was really not going up that much, right? This changed both in level, the speed, and also in shape. So between 2009 and let me see, 2 and 4, right, 2007 to 2009 and 9 to 14, and you see this rapid increase in the level of consumption, but also this is the latest, 2014, and you see this jump. These are all constant price, and you see this increase. So what is happening here?
Because the inflation cost.
This is all controlled for inflation.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the level has gone up and people are spending money now, right? But especially at these ages, under age 20. Read.
Education.
Education, right. So so education, but also you can see old age consumption that's going up. People are earlier back in 2009, the people of my age or younger They were not spending much yet, but now they learn how to spend as well. And also some of this is due to healthcare. Right? All right. So who is paying for the consumption? Where does it come from? How much of this comes from public? How much this is from the family? Okay, so this is the education from the private. So private consumption for education, families are spending more. But also you see the public consumption. This is the green part, public consumption for education. So the government was also spending more. Ignored is middle part. This is what's called the other. So we're first basically looking at education, healthcare, and look at pension, right? And so healthcare goes up, and this is all public spending. Oh no, this part. This is public spending on health, and this is private spending on health. So they're both increasing. So in other words, I think one of the nice things about the national transfer accounts is we can look at not just the life cycle deficit, which is going to be important later on, but also can look at consumption, look at income at the national level, and look at the sources. Okay. So this is changes in income and consumption. What about life cycle deficit? Now we turn this around. Okay. So this is surplus now. Okay. Flip the graph. So these are the deficit, okay, and deficit at old age, and this is the surplus. Okay. So how do we read these results? And as we saw early on, deficit was increasing because people are spending more on education, both public and private, right? And you see how this changed just in 5 years between the first 5 years was really not changing much, and the second 5 years, it's changing a lot. People are spending a lot more on education. And also the deficit is increasing, right? Because of healthcare spending is increasing. So the yellow line is the latest, 2014. I think what's really important for population aging later on is looking at the surplus, okay, the aggregate surplus. So surplus was going up, but this increase, the surplus increase from 2009 to 2014, the 5 years, the pace was slowing down. So this would make sense, as we saw earlier on. Consumption increase was picking up faster than labor income consumption, right? Labor income increase. So China still had 2014 substantial amount of surplus, but the accumulation speed was slowing down. So this morning, I was having this conversation with Professor Zhou. I got a note from Professor Shen Ke at Fudan. She's been doing the 2018 update calculations, and she was saying that the surplus was reduced between 2014 and 2018 by 39%. So that still needs to be verified and analyzed and written up. But this is before COVID. So we know that that level is going up in China. You see from other sources. And China had, because of the rapid economic growth, had this sizable surplus. This is the aggregate amount. Okay, it's fixed price as well. But that surplus is getting, speed is getting smaller. Okay, now, yes.
Why in 2014 there will be a peak around 26 and 27, and it's different from the 2002, 2007, and 2005.
Oh, this peak, right?
Yeah, why there is a peak in 2014?
Good question. I think it's, if we go back, it's the income.
Yes, but I also remember that the income peak for 2014 is around 30, and it's different from this picture, right?
It's roughly, yeah, roughly 30.
Yeah, but in 30 it's discrete, but the peak of the income you show in the previous figure
Uh-huh.
is around 30.
Right.
But in 30, we can see that it's decreased from 26, 27 to 30, right? And this not the same trend.
Let's go back to look at.
There's 830, and there will be a peak, right?
So income rose quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Very fast in 5 years. And what's the peak is, it's around here, it's 30.
Yes, around 30.
Around 30. And when you look at surplus is this group is in terms of what they were making, income and the consumption. So this is the group, age group, they are saving the most. They have the most left over. It's understandable, they are the ones even though if you look at social media, they're saying, oh, age people in the 20s, 30s, they call the New Year one, right? They spend all their money. But that's only a segment of the population we are learning from. Okay, so so that's the first part of the results I want to share with you. And so who pays for the deficit? Or where's the transfer happening? And so I'm sorry this one has so much stuff. But this is the labor income, basically, this side. This is the left-hand side of that equation. Okay, labor income, and this is the consumption. It's I think what's nice is here we can have public consumption and private consumption. So the difference between the two is life cycle surplus or deficit. Right? So private consumption is increasing quite rapidly. Right? And public consumption has increased, especially after 2009, but it was not going up much faster. And so this is the transfers, right? And so savings, people still save a lot. And private asset income is still quite important. But I think what we say is that if we're looking at both savings and asset income, we saw signs of slowing down during the last 5 years in this result. Okay, so this just gives a more kind of detailed picture of the life cycle surplus or deficit. We won't have time to go much into this, but what's nice about NTA is we can also do this by income level, household income level. So we can look at the public transfers, who's getting more. So this is one of the papers we published. And basically, it's not surprising, is the people in the top quartile of income households, they received more of this increased public transfers. With this methodology, we can not only talk about life cycle deficit, intergenerational transfers, but also according to income levels, look at inequality. So the public, okay, basically we did this for both 2009 and 2014. So basically, I would summarize this in 2 sentences. One is the public transfer, the new welfare system is still quite regressive. The people who have higher income is getting more. Well, basically, urban people, they get more pension, right? And so that's first. And then the second is actually when we compare the 2 periods, the degree of regressiveness it's been reduced. So in terms of the absolute amount of relative to their income, the lower income groups were actually getting more proportionally help. Someone, yes.
Question about looking at income. Can you also look at it by rural or urban registration?
No, we were not able to do this. Mainly, the income, okay, the system of national accounts, the public data for the whole country, they don't do this by urban rural. So we can split this by household income level. I suppose we could do urban rural as well. Yeah, I suppose we could, but yeah.
Yeah, it seems somewhat incorrect to say that this is evidence of regressive transfers, right? Because it's all relative to how much they've paid into the system over the lifetime. So as a share of total contributions, would this maybe be reversed?
Yeah, you could make that argument that, but it's such a complicated argument that you're right, because the urban employees, they paid more into the system, even though it was a pay-as-you-go system. So they should get more. But on the the other political economy side, you could make an argument that the rural people, they also contributed to the economy. They were just not in the system, right? They were not in the pension system, but they did contribute to the national economy. So you're right. So this actually reflects some of that. And but you can also look at this in terms of education. Now this is college education, and it's the urban kids. The more educated, high income family kids get to go to college, and college is substantially subsidized by public spending. Right? So yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I was saying, if the comparison, you can see some. I'm going to skip this. Okay, now here's the last part about aging. That is with the national transfer account calculations, we know what's the per capita level transfer that's needed, and then with the number of people, and we can project population pretty easily. You can actually project what would be the demand or the need for public transfers in pension, healthcare, and here we include education as well. So there are two scenarios, basically. One is to say population only. That is no change in the what's called the benefit level. That China stays at its current level of pension and healthcare spending, per capita spending. And so it's a population effect only. So this is the one. This is the share of spending as GDP. Okay, not government spending, expenditure, but GDP. It's 4%, 2014. And this would go up to about 8% in 10 years. And it could go up to about 14% by the mid-century. So that's assuming no benefit level change. However, it's pretty unthinkable that given China's economic income level, and given how fragmented the healthcare and especially the pension system is, people get paid very differently. So even some equalization within the country, okay, we bring up the people who are paid 1/5, 1/10 of what others in terms of pension. And that would basically, we made the assumption that we set China's level by 2035 to OECD's level at the beginning of the century. So to say, okay, China would gradually move up, and that would increase the spending. Let's see, all right, by the middle of the century, about 18%. So 18% of GDP would be spent on these social benefits alone, public transfer. So here we have the NTA results. We have a published projection. We can put together. Okay. Okay. So this is Okay, so we have different assumptions for fertility and for benefit level. And let's just say we use this blue line. It's the median fertility level and an increase in the generosity level. And so by 2035, this is going to be close to 30%. Right? And we can't look beyond 2050 because that's going to go crazy. Let me try to put this into some common sense language. The share of government revenue last year, I think last 2 years, as GDP in China is about 30%. Currently, public revenue spending is about 30% of GDP, which is low. I think in a lot of European societies is like over 50%. Right? So in China, it's about 30%.
So, so the GDP increase percentage will be equal to like the transfer percent, the increase. The GDP increase like 10%, the national transfer will increase 10%, right?
No. You have to look at the difference between spending and income. So GDP could be increasing by 10%, but if you spend a lot more, then you won't have surplus. Right? So let me complete what I was trying to put this into real sense. So last year, in the last 2 years, the government, let me see if I have this. Yeah, here. So at the end of the planned economy, this is the share of government expenditure as the percentage of GDP. It's about 30%. And it dropped to only 15% in the mid-1990s when China was really going through a difficult time. And now it's over 25%. I think the last few years increased a little bit. So it's about 30%. Okay, 30%. But if China was going to spend 30% of its GDP, like in the middle of the century, on these social public transfers, that's all the government expenditure right now. So China would not, government would not have money to do anything else except to increase taxation level. And that's what China is going to do. And we just saw the concluding remarks by China's old leader, the new leader, that they're going to go with common prosperity, right? So they will have to figure out what can be done. So this is the share of GDP. This is not share of government revenue, and it's not going to be easy. Okay, so here this is another kind of like side story. Is 50% of the government revenue comes from local governments, but 90% of the spending is local. So how do you increase the pension level or education expenditure per student when you have such a huge regional local area difference? You can have a lot of political resistance just to equalize what you want to do. So let me get back to here. Okay, this is what actually we see. This is the last slide before we go into discussion. So this is what, let's see, what is this? Okay, so this is the level that assumes we have an increase in benefit level. And this is demography, population growth only, okay, up to 2050, the share of GDP, okay. So as I said earlier, this could go up to the entire share of the entire government revenue could go into these public transfers, right? With moderate increase in benefit level and with population aging. So we projected by 2020, and China would spend 11.76% of its GDP. And this is what's reported by 2020. 13%. So what I'm saying is what's happening is actually faster than our ROSI projection, right? So this is the projection that incorporates increase in public in the benefit level, and real spending in 2020 already exceeded our projection. Okay, so if this continues, we're going to see more serious challenge for the state. Okay. Of course, the state still can increase taxes, right? That's a whole different story. It's not going to be easy. So I think this is the last slide. So we went through the income, consumption, life cycle deficit, inequality, and aging. And so this is really a stress test for the Chinese government. And that is why I think for those who watch what Xi Jinping said, he also said we need to raise fertility. So that's for the next round back, whether there was actually any way that you can raise fertility. So with that, I think I should end here. Oh, let me continue. I mean, end with a positive note. We have to look at population. It's not just population aging, and China has, at the same time, it invested in hardware infrastructure, has really invested in software, in education, and you see in 1982, when I kind of finished college in China, it was 4%. I think that's the admission rate. And people in their early 20s, even back in 2000, less than 10% had college education. And this is the number now, it's over 50%. Right? So annual enrollment increased tenfold since the late 1990s, from 1 million per year to close to 10 million. China had 10 million births last year. So in the future, just like in South Korea, Taiwan, or Japan, all Chinese children could go to college, right? Just with the current capacity. And so this could, make a huge difference in terms of all the calculations we've done earlier, in terms of deficit, income, but that we would not know. And this is the last one that has some summaries, and then I'll open up for discussion. Thank you.
Professor, I have one question from the chat on the Zoom, where there are also more people watching that I wanted to ask, and then we can open it up for questions in the room. And so Daniel Goodkind, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Daniel, asks, my question is about the billion-pound gorilla in the room that wasn't talked about explicitly, China's half-century campaign to control fertility and population size, which was intended to foster economic growth. So you have a 16-country counterfactual model that suggests that China's birth rates without that campaign would imply a much larger population today, total population maybe of 2 billion, with a very different age structure. So why not rerun the NTA calculations with your own counterfactual to assess both parallel universes, right? The present one and the one that would have occurred had that population control campaign not existed.
2 billion people. I don't remember we had a calculation. I think the calculation was to show that there were 16 other countries also had similar birth rate, the population birth rate as China back in the 1970s.
Right.
And they did not go through the one-child policy. They also the birth rate, fertility rate declined in those 16 countries, the average. And so the Chinese claim, which actually Daniel Goodkind believes in this, that the one-child policy reduced Chinese birth by 400 million, and that was exaggeration. And that was the calculation. I don't remember having like 2 billion people, how to do this. But hypothetically, I could say if China had had a younger age structure, and the transfer would be different. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Wang Feng. An abundance of data, and you walked us through nicely. One thing I've missed, you got on the top line there, China's historical economic boom has come to an end. I didn't follow from all the things you said, how you would get to that conclusion. What do you draw from what you said that gets you to that?
Okay, there's a
It's a
short
very
answer.
important, it's a
Yeah.
very important line.
I totally agree with you. Thank you. There's a short answer I can give you right now, and there's a longer one I hope I can return. I just finished a book called China's Age of Abundance, and that's the whole story. But the short story, because of time, I was trying to go fast. Oh, here. Here's your evidence, Arendt. So throughout much of 1990s and 2000s, this is the annual economic growth rate, about 10%. And since 2010, it's been going down. And even before, prior to the COVID pandemic, and it was 40% down. So it's like from 10% to 6%. I think this year they are expecting something like 3-4%, Mary. The whole year.
3.9. Well,
The
that's
3.9 is
last
last quarter.
Yeah.
The whole year is probably 4 or 5%. Okay. So this actually is a very important graph because I have so many interesting things because time is short. You look at this top line, the red line, and that's the speed of government revenue increase. So when China's economy was growing at 10%, the government was taking in roughly twice at speed, 20% increase revenue. So the government had money to do all sorts of things. But the scary part is here. See what happens when the economy slows down. What happens to government revenue? First 6 months of this year, every single province registered a fiscal deficit. But that's because the COVID tests, like locking down people. But this is even before the COVID. So this is short answer. It has come to an end. I mean, the economic growth will continue. I think it's the age of abundance where you have rapid increase in material output. That has come to an end. I have a whole set of explanations to say why it's come to an end, but let's wait for next time. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the I think it was the last chart about pensions. It's more of a policy question. Pensions in China are mostly taxed from the company directly, and the individual pays, a pretty minor portion of their wage into the pension system. I find Xi Jinping's focus on common prosperity annoying because he never is able to say exactly how they will fix the policies to get to common prosperity. So there's a lot of slogans, but there's not much policy detail. So when you're looking at something like these extrapolations into the future, and there seems to be a need to increase pensions, it's already a very high percentage of the wage bill anyway. So companies, I don't think, are going to be able to handle much higher pension contributions. Pensions are still pooled below the provincial level, so they're heavily decentralized. And other types of taxes like property tax or income tax have been delayed all through his 10 years in power. So do you have a sense of where the policy will go? Because I don't.
So thank you, Mary. I think for those who have followed the Chinese news in the last few years, in the last few days, looking at how Xi Jinping got his third term, and we're worried, and also I worry for different reasons, not just because of his political crackdowns and authoritarian tendencies, but incompetence of this team to figure out how to do all the stuff, right? And for those who are not Chinese expert like Mary, the contribution is, I think pension alone is 20-some%, 23%. It's among the highest in the world. So what happens is, so either you don't pay, you try to, I think the compliance rate is low. So economists have been making arguments that you lower the rate and so you can increase the compliance. Right? People try not to pay for all sorts of reasons. And the other is both in 2008, 2009, and last year, the government said explicitly when local government had problems with their finances, you can dip into, you can borrow from the pension fund. I don't know how they're going to just, kick the can down the road like that. So I am concerned that, nobody should be envious of Xi Jinping's job. There are so many things that he just can fail. I mean, it's one thing that you stop this belligerent behavior globally. It's another thing that you don't pay your retirees inflation adjusted pension. Right? We know how that is going to support. So yeah, so that's why I think all this kind of analysis really is useful to inform what's really happening. Look at national transfers. Oh, I have a hand there first.
Thank you so much for the insights. I just wondering about what does the governments of China concrete actions can do for reduce unequal public transfer to help the inequality. Because what happened, or is there any policy recommendation to solve that problem? Because what happens in China can also happen in other countries, especially in emerging markets or developed countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I think China, actually, the government has done a relatively good job in terms of transfer at young age for education. That's been improving. And I won't get into the detailed examples of what they're doing. But for pension and healthcare, these two, very little. I would say pension, they've tried to merge some programs. And but when you merge, you basically have to lift everybody to a higher level. You can't just let people lose benefits. But healthcare is one of the sectors with education, the two sectors that just have had the least reforms. And healthcare is highly inefficient, unequal. And we have no time to get into this. Income level increase, I think in 2010s, 2000, the first decade. Per capita income doubled in 10 years. Per capita healthcare expenditure increased twice as fast. So it's this per capita is going up. And healthcare sector is just not being reformed, and it's highly inefficient, unequal, and I because of my affiliation in China, in the privileged group, I could go to a Chinese hospital to see a doctor, and doctors will be waiting for you in Shanghai. And you see a few doctors. They are a sector that's for the high-level officials, right? Because of my affiliation as a professor for them. And you go to first floor of the hospital. It's all crowded, and you see lines and lots of people. A lot of that is it's unequal distribution. A lot of that's inefficiency. Like you have to go to every window to get a signature to pay. Anyway, so yeah, it's hard. I can't give them recommendations. It's just so complex, healthcare. Yes, we have a question.
So you just mentioned that the current level percentage of GDP of public transfer is like 30%, right?
13. Yeah.
13
Oh, no,
in 2020.
yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said the actual figure is
13%.
30%.
13.
And the total government spending would be like 26.
Now it's probably higher.
Yeah.
It's close to 30%.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So that means like the public transfer part makes assume the deficit level is like 4%. That's not.
okay, that's another part I didn't bring in. But that's
So the public transfer almost make up like half of the total government income, right? do you think-
expenditure. Yeah, nearly half. Nearly half.
And you are saying that by the mid of this century, like 2050, the share of GDP of public transfer will be like around 30.
30, yeah.
Yeah, at least about 25. And taken the current share of public transfer in government income, does that necessarily mean that the government income has to rise to like 50% of the GDP?
The share has increased.
Yeah.
Yeah, the share would have increased. So.
So even if the share increased to like 70%, that also means that the government income would rise to like 40% of the GDP. Is that even possible?
It's possible. If you look at, I don't know what's the share in this country, it's actually not that low. I forgot, but in, I think Nordic countries is, even England, I think it's over 50%. We don't know how much our money is actually spent by government, right? So China has a lot of room to increase taxation level.
Yeah.
But it's never a easy drive. So try.
Yeah. But if you do the math, it's like increasing the current tax rate to like
50%.
50% or even 60, right?
Yeah, then okay, now then it would be fine, right? Right now, China spends about half of its government revenue on pensions, on public transfer, and so by that time it would be double. But if China can double or increase its taxation substantially, then this year as government revenue would not increase to 100%, would be like 50, 60%. That's still manageable, right? But it's a whole different set of challenges. How do you raise taxes? If you raise taxes on business, and you talk about income, right? If you raise taxes on private income or on property, I think they're going to do that. China has no property tax. China has no inheritance tax. China has very little wealth, no wealth tax. So China is a paradise for capitalists right now. And so there's still a lot of room, but nothing is easy. It's all pretty. So.
Thank you. We have to end this section, but thank you so much for coming. I think there might be some apples and goodies in the back. If you want to take some on your way out. And thank you, Professor, for an excellent talk.
Thank you.